Welcome to the Distinguished Speaker Series. I'm George Wu. Today I'm very pleased and honored to have with us John Watson, who's the chairman and the CEO. And what we will do is a fireside chat on fueling better decisions. Before I introduce John, I want to mention that this session is sponsored by the Harry Davis Center for Leadership. I'm the faculty director of that. The Center for Decision Research. I am a faculty member of that. The Corporate Management and Strategy Group. I have no affiliation with that group, but it's a wonderful group anyway. And the Chicago Booth Energy Group. So we're going to run this session until 5:50. I have a class at 6, so I will rudely run out the door. And those of you who are also in my class at 6 o'clock, you will do the same because I expect to see you at 6. So I have a handful of questions that I prepared for John. I think I have some other questions that I think others have given, but if some of you have on cards and things like that, want to get some questions, hopefully we'll have some time. And it's not as long a session, so I apologize that everybody will not get an opportunity to ask questions. Okay, so with that as an introduction, let me introduce John Watson. John has been the CEO, chairman of Chevron since the beginning of this decade, January 1st, 2010. Chevron, as many of you know, is a Fortune 500. It's a Fortune 14 company. John's a 1980 graduate of Chicago GSB at that time. He joined Chevron as his first job right out of business school. First as a financial analyst. He served in lots of different roles. He was the head of M&A and strategic planning. He was the CFO. He was the president of international exploration and production, the executive vice president of strategy and development, and of course, the CEO.
37 years, yeah. It's been a long
37 years. Let me say one other thing, which is the school is honoring John next week as a distinguished, for the Distinguished Alumni Award. So let's congratulate John on that amazing honor and welcome him. So the first question is, when I think of the Distinguished Alumni Award, I think it's a statement about success, professional success, and obviously John is a great example of that. But I think more than that, the award is a testament to how people have used what they've learned in their time at University of Chicago in their professional lives. So as some of you are aware, the Center for Decision Research was founded in 1977. John was a graduate in 1980. One of the things that John has spoken very fondly of in terms of influence in his professional career are his classes in behavioral science. So would you like to just share with us a little bit of your thoughts on that and how that's had an impact on your career?
Sure. Well, it was one class at that time, and it was different from some of the other classes in that it caused me to think a little bit differently than I had. Accounting and finance were sort of down the fairway, if you can describe it that way. Whereas the behavioral science was I went in expecting it to be a mushier subject than what I would call the hard finance and accounting and economics classes. And I probably learned the most in the class versus the others. And it was because it opened my eyes to human behavior and how it's different. What people say and what people do are different. And I've actually thought about this class more in retrospect after 37 years than I did in my early days. I enjoyed the course, but as time goes by, people and people-related issues are pretty important. How you judge people, what you expect from people is very important. And of course, I deal with a lot of external constituencies. And so what people say and what people do is just different. Sometimes it's on purpose, sometimes it's not. And so it helps you in designing management systems. It helps you in designing all manner of things that are a part of the job I have. And so I've reflected on it and really wish I had studied more because you all are getting exposed to the subject in a much richer fashion than I was in my formative years.
Okay, so let's dive into decision making at Chevron. So when I think of complex corporate decisions. Oil and gas is pretty high on the list, and I think that there's lots of attributes of that industry that I think make it specifically challenging. In fact, I was thinking when I was kind of preparing these thoughts that my introduction to decision making was a book by who ended up being my PhD advisor, a fellow named Howard Rafa, who wrote a book on decision analysis in 1968. And in fact, the very first example was an oil and gas problem, oil wildcatting, which I think is a classic decision problem. So one way I think of at least a lot of the decisions in that industry is they amount to very, very big bets. Can you talk a little bit about some of what you see as the challenges in making these big bets, hopefully correctly, and what you've done to try to make them better?
Yeah, when I think of bets, I think of my attempt at one point to play blackjack and make money at it, and so it was a very, very quantitative thing. And the connotation of a bet, the way I describe it with my board and with employees is decision making under uncertainty. And so we do make large commitments, and we do have uncertainty. In fact, a lot of banks have risk management committees. My board is my risk management committee. And if you look at our annual report, or if you look at how we approach our business, we are in the risk management business. Literally, I can alphabetize the list of risks that we face in our business. And so we have to be able to manage uncertainty in everything that we do. And it's part of the reason scale is pretty important in our business, and has been over the years, even as big as we are, we do most of our business in joint ventures to mitigate risk. So those exploration wells that you're talking about are a classic, success in a wildcat exploration well is 1 in 5. And that's the kind of risks that we face. And we have a lot of tools to do that, which we can talk about. But decision making under uncertainty is our business, and actually many businesses, as the pace of change accelerates in every business.
So getting to that, and again, digging in a little bit more deeply, I think a lot of times when people think about decision-making in organizations, they think about making decisions. And obviously, one route to making better decisions in organizations is by being a better decision maker yourself. But as a CEO, as John Watson, CEO of Chevron, probably the bigger lever you have is improving corporate decision-making practice. And so you may or may not know, but Chevron is very much a pioneer in terms of formal decision-making processes. They've had processes in place for many, many years. They've continued to improve them. In fact, the words that they use are pretty interesting. Decision quality. I love that word because it sort of brings up maybe purposefully this idea of quality, and as in the Six Sigma movement and continuous improvement and things like that. Can you talk a little bit about that and the process and how you as CEO help to make Chevron continually an improving organization in that dimension?
Sure. We've put in tools and practices that help us through that uncertainty that I was describing. And the more that you can systematize it and accept the fact that you have risk in your decision making, everyone wants to get to a deterministic outcome. This is what's going to happen. The reality is a good quality decision can have bad outcomes. If you accept that exploration wells, that only 1 in 5 are going to be successful,
right,
you are going to have bad outcomes. And so what was the quality of the decision? So in exploration risk, we have several risk-specific geologic risk characteristics, the reservoir, the geology. There are specific things that the professionals, the technicians in the area use to try to quantify that risk. And we actually grade exploration prospects so that we know, is it a 15% well or is it a 40% well? And it's not just a geologist pulling a number out of the air. It's based on criteria. It's the same in all aspects of risk. In fact, we have a decision-driven, gated decision-driven process that we use to make sure that we're framing problems properly, we're understanding alternatives, we're assessing risks that are there, and then we're making an informed decision based on a range of outcomes that are there. So in our company, you'll hear people talk about the S-curve, which is nothing but a probabilistic, a set of outcomes. And you have everyone wants to look in the upper right-hand corner of the curve, which is the less likely outcome that's really, really good.
Yeah.
And then there's the bottom left-hand corner. And so you have a mean, you look at the shape of the curve, you can look at a lot of different things to try to bracket all the different risk characteristics that are there. And then you can interrogate the assumptions around the problem at hand. And it helps make a better quality decision. And then, of course, you incorporate lookbacks into, okay, well, eventually you figure out what the outcome was, and then what did we get right, what did we get wrong, and hopefully you have a feedback loop so that you make better decisions the next time.
Let me ask you about the look back, because I think one of the challenges in the scrutiny after the fact is that you at least have two things going on, and you actually have more, but you have good or bad process and good or bad luck, and the good or bad process could be good or bad process in lots of different things. It could be bad framing, good framing, bad assumptions, bad information, good information, all those kinds of things, or just luck. How do you, given that there's lots of different kinds of ways that you could load the fault, how as an organization do you help to load the fault on the correct villain, so to speak?
Yeah, part of it is trying to not make it personal. It's institutional. So the culture of the company is to do look-backs and to be introspective. And I use that word all the time with our employees. And it doesn't matter whether it's a look-back on a safety related event, which can be very painful. I mean, literally, they're very tough things. But you train the organization to be comfortable with look-backs, and you make sure that when you have an outcome for it doesn't mean there aren't personal outcomes as a result of decisions, but what was the quality of the decision? How was it executed? You can start breaking down outcomes and try to see, well, where did we go wrong or where did we go right, and try to be honest about it. And look, we're not perfect in the organization. One of the things that helps us is the passage of time. In some cases, your investment decisions, you have a little bit of time. And so the perpetrator, if you will, may be in a different role. And there's a time and place to associate an outcome with decisions that were made. That's a personnel process. That's different. We try to be clinical about the evaluations of decisions that we make and not make it personal. But I'll tell you, there have been times when I've been reviewing the outcomes of decisions I made in previous jobs, and so good and bad, by the way. And so there are chances for me to role model that kind of behavior in the company, and for other leaders to role model and not look for scapegoats. There's a time and place for accountability, but learning in the organization, if you put accountability into those lookbacks, other than being honest, you'll cease to get good lookbacks.
Can I talk about the feedback? So I think the time thing is really interesting, and I think the fact that people move roles and it becomes less raw, so to speak, when the outcomes are bad, that seems like something that's good, but it seems like there's a couple things that go in the opposite direction. One is that with time passing, we are less familiar with how we actually thought about stuff, and our memory, I don't even know what happened yesterday. How could I even think about what happened when I made a decision in 2009? And 2009 in oil and gas terms is not that long a time. I guess one other, and then I guess the second thing that's related to that is those are pretty long feedback processes for making decisions, and I think that obviously you would like to be nimble, you'd like to be nimble in the kind of tech world kind of way, but you're a 30-year, 50-year, long-term play kind of business. So how do you think about those things?
Yeah, well, you're exactly right. We're a long cycle time business, and we try to we're actually evolving to try to capture the learning sooner rather than later. I'll give you an example where we've had some difficulties. We've had a couple of our big capital projects where we've had overruns on the projects. Well, I want to know what went wrong now. I don't want to wait to know when the project is done. I want to understand now. And so we've been trying to accelerate some of the learnings earlier in the process. I mean, we have, I mentioned we have a decision-driven approach, so we can conduct look-backs sooner rather than later. But the facts are, we have outcomes that take, some of the things I'm dealing with today are the good and bad, are the consequences of decisions that were made by my predecessor.
Absolutely.
And I'm very grateful for some of the decisions that were made by my predecessor and his predecessor and so on. But that all gets into how you design the comp system, how you reward and evaluate people. One of the things that we do is try to make sure we understand, when it gets down to the people side of it, that we understand where the accountability resides. And we haven't been perfect in this area, but we work at it. For example, we know on appropriation requests who was involved. And when we do the look-backs, we go back to the people that were involved. And it's usually a new set of people. And the organization has been conditioned to be candid. And we set up the process so I'm not interrogating people, but we have people that are very knowledgeable, whether they're subsurface experts, construction experts, or whatever the area might be. But it's imperfect, but we've gotten better at it over time to accelerate the learnings, which is what the look-back process is mostly about.
Yeah. So one last question about this aspect of decision processes, which is that it seems, you have a very formal process for big decisions. I don't know what the capital amount is, but they're relatively large, $50 million decisions and things like that. Chevron makes a lot of decisions which are smaller in scope. If you add up the sum of all those small decisions, they probably end up being quite a lot of big decisions. What do you do to make sure that the discipline that you use for the big decisions has a spillover when people aren't watching so carefully, when there aren't such formal processes, all kinds of things like that?
The same tools are available. Now, the rigor around a $37 billion project like we're doing in Kazakhstan, the discipline that you go through on the engineering and other aspects of that decision are different than are needed for a small, we're going to drill a couple of wells in the San Joaquin Valley of California. But the basic tools, and we have simplified versions of them that are more fit for purpose. But the basic tools and the basic framework that you use is the same.
Absolutely.
But we work very hard. In fact, one of the efforts in the company now is to simplify some of that so that you make sure that it's fit for purpose and that it's not a check-the-box activity that's not needed for a simpler decision. But some of the simple tools, like we have a decision quality index that you can go through to kind of check yourself. Have I checked these various things when I'm making the decision? Tools that people can actually use individually without it being very elaborate to make sure that they've considered the things they should have considered for the decision at hand.
Yeah, that seems absolutely right. Is that you want the same discipline to be embodied in the super rigorous, crazy due diligence that you do for $37 billion investment. As a smaller scale decisions, you don't want a very different, but it needs to fit the scale and the scope of the thing.
Well, and I can reinforce that, and leaders in the company can reinforce it by asking those questions. What alternatives did you consider?
Yeah.
I mean, there's a list of questions leaders are trained to ask to try to promote that sort of thinking. They didn't just jump to the first thing that's most expedient.
That's right. So one of the things I teach managerial decision making, or I have, and one of the things that I love as a sort of conversation is sort of the tension between models and intuition. And one of the things, I think John and I have a kind of similar kind of background. We're analytical people who sort of, I'm an analytical guy, studied applied math. I'm teaching psychology now because it's interesting, the sort of the tug of war between models and judgment. And I think one of the things that seems particularly pertinent to your industry is that there are going to be lots of judgments. We'd like information, we'd like to build a model, at the end of the day is somebody's going to make a guess, and we're going to go with that guess. So
A judgment.
A judgment.
An informed judgment.
A judgment. But can you talk about how you fold those two together? Because I know that you guys use a lot of formal models. I know that ultimately you make many decisions on judgments, and obviously you make decisions on a combination of the two.
Well, machines can help you, and models can help you, but they, for example, in processing seismic information, you need these big complex models to distill information down to something usable. When it comes to financial models of business decisions, you use them mechanically at your own peril, would be the description I would make. I spent a lot of time here studying cost of capital and down to the decimal point of how you calculate it and how you do that. Let me tell you, it's irrelevant. It's important to understand
but get it right for your exam.
What I mean to say is the uncertainty in the cash flows that you're dealing with when it comes to a decision. I mean, think about just prices alone. I was really smart 3 years ago. Okay, when oil was over $100 a barrel and we were making over $20 billion a year, I was really smart. I don't look as smart today because we've missed it badly on prices. The whole industry has been. Well, that's just one risk factor. And so there is judgment that's going to be required on all manner of those data inputs to those models. There's no geologist worth their salt that can't make a prospect look good. They're optimists.
Right.
And that's why we have peer reviews, to reflect maybe more sober science and a check on that inevitable optimism that comes into someone who's been chasing an opportunity for a period of time. And so you need to have those checks and balances, and cost of capital is relevant, but it's the point is there are many other variables that can swamp the outcome of a decision. And so there is judgment that's applied. I guess what you want to have is informed judgment is the way I would describe it. And you can get all the advice that you want, and you can have all the experts come in, but ultimately you've got to make a decision. And so you want to be well informed. You want to go through that decision quality framework to make sure you've considered all the things you should have. But at the end of the day, there's going to be judgments. My two predecessors I learned a lot from, and the one that 2 times ago, what I learned from him is I would watch him in meetings, and he would watch people very closely, and he would look for conviction, and he would look to understand if they knew what they were talking, and he would ask questions until he became convinced they knew what they were talking about. And he wasn't, that was just his method, but he would watch people very carefully because he knew he wasn't the expert, that my 2-time president wasn't the expert in everything, but he had a way of watching people and asking them questions that I learned a lot from, so that he could see it was helping him with that uncertainty. How much did they really know? How big is the uncertainty here, or how much are they really sure? And there's a judgment that comes in that.
So, and I think that point of being as informed as possible, understanding what the basis of that judgment is based on is really important. It seems like there's another issue, and you talked a little bit about it with peer reviews, but I would love to hear more of your thoughts. Is, in our managerial decision-making class, we talk a lot about things that we spend a lot of time doing research on. So kind of a stylized example would be, I'm somebody who spent 2 years investigating a prospect, all kinds of things like that. It's easy for reasons that aren't necessarily even accessible for me to start moving some of the numbers upward a little bit. I'll produce judgments that will go into a model that will tell us to go ahead. That's going to perhaps be bias. Oftentimes it will be a bias. But as an organization, there are kind of predictable situations of that sort. And what do we do? What do you do as an organization to unbias the process as much as you can of those kinds of things?
You have to be careful when you're making business decisions that if you only reward decisions that are of one kind, people will give you more decisions of that nature. Let me give you an example. We contemplated entering southern Iraq a few years back when there was the opening for investment in southern Iraq. And we had a team that was geared up for it. We had done a lot of exchange work with bringing lots of technical people from Iraq to try to help it with its development. So we had invested a lot of time, money, and energy to create an opportunity. Mm-hmm. At the end of the day, we chose not to bid at all on the opportunity. And I went out of my way to commend the team because they had to recommend, the leader of that team had to recommend against even bidding on the opportunity.
Right.
And I went out of my way to publicize inside the company the quality of the decision and the courage that it took.
That's great.
To tell me something and to tell the organization something they didn't really want to hear. They wanted to hear we're going forward, we're going to do this. We had to make a decision not to do it. And I think we made the right business decision for us. But those are the kind of things that I think you have to watch for in the company so that you reward people for making the, quote, right decision and to make decisions with integrity and for being honest when they do look-backs. And so it's all about my behaviors and the behaviors of leaders in those circumstances because you can extinguish good things if you don't give attention, if people pay attention to what I pay attention to. And so you can extinguish good behaviors if you don't recognize them.
Okay, so one last conversation, then I'll go through some of the questions, which is, I think it's last thing that's like always, I think, a real struggle for organizations. It seems like a particular struggle for your organization is, is how do you get your organization to take the right amount of risk, right? And I know that you have lots of kind of vehicles for minimizing risk through partnerships and other kinds of things, and obviously derivatives and kinds of financial hedging and things like that. But it seems
tight internal controls in that area, by the way. But go ahead.
Yeah, but it's certainly we know lots of examples of organizations that move from these regimes of too much to too little, and it seems especially a challenge in an industry where you have oil prices being super volatile. So just to give you an example is that I've mispronounced it once today, so I'm not even going to try, is that in July of 2016, Chevron announced an increased commitment to their partnership in Kazakhstan to the order of $37 billion. That's a lot. On that day of the announcement...
Even in our family, it's a lot of money. Yeah.
On the day of the announcement, oil prices were $47. They had been as low as $29 earlier that year. I happened to look, and the next month after they made the decision, oil prices fell another $10. It seems like the right thing to do. It seems maybe even right to be counter-cyclical, but it seems like a very, very hard thing to resist the vicissitudes of the market, shareholders who are expecting you not to do something like that. What do you do to get your organization to take the right amount of risk?
Well, it was a big decision for the company, and just if you're in that circumstance, it was pretty challenging. I guess I would say that we have pretty robust risk management tools that we use and framework. One risk mitigator we have had is we're a big company, so we have a portfolio of opportunities, and we have a number of. It's one of the few longer cycle big investment projects we're taking on right now. We have several others that are just being completed now, and a lot of the money, the revenue that we're generating is being recycled into shorter cycle projects. But we've had a very strong balance sheet, and we consciously, it wasn't an accident that we had more cash than debt on our balance sheet during some of those good years. And the financial community gave me a fair amount of grief for that. Why don't you give it back to us? Why don't you, give it back to us all the time? And we've increased the dividend. We did repurchase some shares, but we always kept enough capacity on our balance sheet to be able to withstand those ups and downs. Now, we were tested last year, and we're still being tested to a degree, but we've largely worked our way through it. That project in particular had been worked very hard. We felt that it was a counter-cyclical investment. It was an opportunity where we could execute the project with higher quality labor around the world available to do all the work that needed to be done. And we had a very strong track record of success. And there were other technical reasons why it needed to go, why it needed to go at that time. And so we made that decision, but we packaged that decision with a series of other things that mitigated the enterprise risk to what we felt was a prudent degree and what the board felt was to a prudent degree. So, I feel good about that decision, and 5 years from now, I hope it'll be one of those decisions that my successor will look at and feel pretty good about. I'm over 60, so I have to be gone within 5 years.
All right. So let me take a. First question is, what is your role as CEO in shepherding Chevron into using and deploying renewable and clean technologies in the next decade? Let's leave it at that.
Well, a couple things. When we stand back, that question has many levels to it. To start with, we take a fundamental view on what the energy system is going to look like. And I don't care what view you look at, even the greenest of views going forward, we're going to need oil and gas for the foreseeable future. And so we aim to be one of the most efficient providers of oil and gas. And we consider all environmental regulations. Part of that managing risk under uncertainty is considering different states of the world with respect to environmental regulations. So we factor that in. And one of the things that gives us comfort about continuing to invest in the business is that for the oil and gas people in the audience, there's a decline curve in oil fields and gas fields. And so you're going to need more investments. In terms of alternative energy, our comparative advantage is in the hydrocarbon system. We built the largest renewables business, our geothermal business, which we just sold, which was built on some of the technologies that we've had. We sold that business because we couldn't get any more business, and it was going to be worth more to somebody else. But we built a very large renewables business. We have invested in biofuel technology. Advanced biofuels have proven to be a lot tougher. We use wind and solar at certain sites, but we're not a windmill or solar panel manufacturer. We have no competency in that area. So our objectives are to be a very efficient provider of oil and gas, and to be sure that we are looking very hard at technologies that can minimize the footprint that we have out there. We're literally days away from starting up the largest carbon storage project in the world, in Australia. We and our partners spent over $2 billion on it. And it's stripping greenhouse gases out of the methane, the natural gas that comes out of the ground, and injecting it into old aquifers. We're part of the largest carbon sequestration project in Canada. And so we have significant commitments to producing our products in a way that will both deliver the energy that the world is going to need to keep the lights on and to give you the quality of life that you want, and to try to do it while minimizing that footprint. Okay.
Second question. As a CEO, can you walk us through how you think of oil prices, and in particular, what your thought process was when oil prices crashed a couple years ago, and how you dealt with the numerous decisions that presumably that shock led to in your organization?
Well, this is one of those things where I feel like I'm pretty good at learning from the past, but may not have done as good a job as I should have during this period, because it's the fifth time oil prices had fallen 50% during my time with the company. And so why didn't we see it coming to the same degree? And I'd give you a couple answers. One, we did expect there would be that it was possible that there would be a reduction in prices. What happens in our business is, for the most part, you make the investment up front, and then you produce you produce the oil and gas for a lot of years to come. And so what happens is it's actually a fairly tenuous balance between supply and demand, and elasticities. I mean, there isn't much movement in supply or demand in the short run for oil and gas. And so what happens is if you get slightly out of kilter, where supply is greater than demand, you can get big run-ups in prices, as you saw when demand was exceeding supply in the early part of this decade. And then you get prices, basically, they'll fall to variable costs if you get in a surplus supply. And we misgauged several things that happened on the supply side. One was the Saudis deciding to increase production into a surplus and declining market. Didn't expect them to do that. Expected them to hold their production, did not expect them to actually exacerbate the issue by raising production. We missed what's happening in Russia, where with sanctions that have been put on Russia and their currency falling in half, it made their oil industry much more competitive. And in fact, the general strength of the US dollar has resulted in oil and gas that's produced outside the United States being cheaper, basically, to produce. The strength of the US dollar, particularly in Russia, but also elsewhere, we didn't anticipate as well. And then the third thing that we didn't anticipate very well is the explosion in activity in the Permian Basin and in the unconventional sector in the US. And it was a confluence of those three things happening at the same time that pushed supply and demand and the hedging activity that went along with some of that work in this country. The financial markets contributed to that, not in a negative way, but just so producers were able to hedge forward and continue activity that put more supply into a surplus market. So those are all fine explanations for how we got it wrong. And we're now largely working through that. Markets are balancing, and you're seeing some recovery, but it's a little bit slower. We try to process those learnings. We have proprietary work that we do around both supply and demand. And sometimes we're pretty good, but sometimes it's worth stepping back. And the longer term lessons here are when prices are high, it sense a lot of activity. And at its core, that plus geopolitics is something that you're always going to have some unpredictability and uncertain outcomes, and you have to be prepared for it. I will say that financially, we've weathered this as well as most, and so we've been able to get through it by managing costs and a lot of hard work internally, but we didn't get it right, and it just proves that there's uncertainty in the outcomes.
Yeah. All right, I'm going to ask. There's a couple questions on decision making, oil and gas decision making. There's a couple broader questions, so let me try to see if I understand this. So oil and gas companies, by their nature, have to play some kind of follow the leader. For example, when there's a new play or basin is discovered. This also seems to be the case from a capital deployment standpoint in terms of international versus domestic M&A. How does the decision making at Chevron prevent it from playing this follow the leader game? And do you think similar decisions that how do you keep it from following?
If I understand right, how do you prevent yourself from following fads?
Fads, yeah.
that are out there. Well, I don't think we've been particularly fad conscious. There is conventional wisdom in our business, and that conventional wisdom can change, and you can be influenced by what's in the media. There is a herd effect, if I can describe it that way. The way you try to get through that is to go back to some of the fundamentals and make sure that you are really interrogating your assumptions and options and making sure that you don't do that. Because let me give you an example. With the space in you hear a lot about shale oil and shale gas that's being produced in the United States. And so there was an expectation, well, there's shale rock everywhere around the world. So this is going to happen everywhere. There's going to be a lot more oil and gas production from shale in China and everywhere else around the world. Well, we took a hard look, and we did test a couple of other basins, but we didn't get what I would call over our skis because we had some fundamental views about the rocks, the infrastructure that's required, the private property rights that aren't present in some of these areas. There are a lot of drivers to the activity in the U.S. that are different from the circumstances in Central Europe, China, Australia, or other locations. And so we took a proprietary view where we spent a little bit of money, but we didn't get too committed, if I can describe it that way.
Okay, a couple of, I guess, perspective questions. What are your perspectives on Saudi Arabia and Russia reaching compromise in decreasing oil and gas production and pushing oil prices up?
Yeah. I think one of the more interesting developments in OPEC in the recent past has been their desire to bring in non-OPEC members to some of the supply allocation practices that they want to put in place. The interesting thing is when I go back to the early years, and OPEC was a much larger percentage of the available supply. It was close to half. Now it's down to about a third. And so you have a circumstance where, give or take, the United States, Russia, and Saudi Arabia produce about the same, give or take about the same amount. And so it's natural for the Saudis to try to bring in others to OPEC. The truth is most OPEC countries are producing at capacity, and the only country that has any significant spare capacity is Saudi Arabia, and it's been that way for some time, actually. OPEC acted like a cartel 30 years ago and drove up prices significantly, and what they learned during that experience was when prices go from $2 a barrel up to 30, 40, 50 and higher, is you stimulate a lot of supply elsewhere. And we actually the world had 15 million barrels a day of spare capacity that OPEC had to manage away over time, and they finally did that. And so they've learned their lesson, and mostly Saudi Arabia and their philosophies have been around reducing volatility in prices. They've wanted to keep prices from getting too high and too low. And so if you think about in the relatively recent past, that was their focus. They changed that view a couple years ago when they, as I said earlier, started producing more oil into a surplus. Now they're trying to manage supply, and they're looking to some of the other large producers to help them do that. And from their point of view, there's something in it for them to do that. There's a lot of pain that is being felt in oil-producing countries. You've read about the pain for companies in this country, in the oil service sector, and companies, big and small companies in the private sector. But what's not really stated, and I look around the room and I see a lot of people, a very diverse group here. There are probably some people from oil-producing countries. There's a lot of pain because they have social costs and others to meet, and I think there's a desire on the part of the Saudis in particular, the Russians and others, to move prices up, but not incent so much additional supply that it causes another relapse in price. So it's a long way of saying I suspect they'll continue with some of their collaboration and try to manage prices through this period where there's disinvestment taking place, waiting for those decline curves to kick in and prices to gradually rise again.
Okay. One corporate question. Is Chevron an energy company or an oil and gas company?
Well, we're an energy company with a competitive advantage producing oil and gas, is I guess the way I would describe it. No, it's if you look at the world's energy system, it is a vast system, and it's going to take oil, gas, coal, nuclear, and renewables. And if we have a competitive advantage and we're still doing biofuels research, for example, but it's a lot harder than people think to develop new sources of energy. We have no comparative advantage producing windmills and solar panels. I mean, the oil industry went through a diversification period. Most of you are too young, but the oil companies own Montgomery Ward's department store. They own Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey Circus. They owned a lot of things that they had no comparative advantage. Hard rock minerals, mining is not producing oil. So the industry has a history of, we're good at what we're good at. And now there is technology around biofuels that has some promise, but it's proven to be very difficult to produce at scale. So research is going to be important to producing new forms of energy, but there are plenty of people out there that are going to produce windmills and solar panels What's going to be needed to get new forms of energy is going to be a lot of research and a lot of time. Bill Gates talks about an energy miracle being needed, and that's going to take a lot of research.
Okay. So one question about your growth in organization. Can you talk a little bit about the role that mentors have played in your success?
The best mentoring is mentoring you don't realize you're getting. And I got a lot of it in my early years in the company. I was very fortunate that I worked around people that, it's overused, but they took me under their wing. They were very nice to me. And there are ways to make yourself mentorable that I would advise you. One is to do your homework and make yourself useful in whatever you're asked to do. But then if you're inquisitive and you ask good questions and you do your homework, people generally gravitate toward those that they see some promise in or some people they want. People like to mentor others. There are a lot of formal mentoring programs that companies put in place, and we have some of those as well. But making yourself mentorable in your day-to-day work is really important. And I've received it all along the way. I've received explicit mentoring from my two immediate predecessors that I talk a lot about that was very helpful. And I mean, they literally sat me down at times and talked to me about certain issues. And so I've tried to do the same thing with younger people in my company, where I try to give them the benefits of the experience that I've had. And I'm not sure people realize I'm trying to mentor them, but that's what I'm doing. And so make yourself mentorable. Seek it out from not just the most senior person in your company or where you work, but those that you respect, those that are approachable, those that have the knowledge that you would like to acquire. Be inquisitive. I don't have an engineering degree. I'm the first of my kind in our company. And so early on, I realized there were a lot of complex technical issues in my company that I didn't know. And so I got good at asking questions early. And it's probably one of the things that's enabled me to be successful is I was able to, I realized sooner or later you're not going to be the expert on anything. You're going to be relying on other people. So the sooner you get good at asking good questions, the better off you're going to be over time.
Last question. So beyond mentoring and asking good questions, we're honoring you as a distinguished alum. Thinking back maybe to your 1980 self or people in this room, is any last parting wisdom that either you'd give your old self or you'd give people in this room about whatever?
Yeah, no, first, you have a great degree here that is going to, the University of Chicago, I don't know if you realize it, but it travels. The reputation of this university travels. And so you will immediately get, there will be unconscious bias in your favor. Whether you deserve it or not.
Take advantage.
There will be unconscious bias in your favor because you went to the University of Chicago. So take that with some humility, but understand that you have a great degree. And I'll really offer these folks some similar comments that I made to your earlier group, and that is take whatever work, wherever your career takes you, enjoy what you do. I never would have thought I'd spend 37 years with Chevron. I really didn't know much when I joined Chevron about the energy business. But enjoy what you do. You're going to do it a lot. You're going to spend more time at work than you are with your family. And so you better enjoy it. So it's partly about making a decent living. But if that's your sole driver, you're not going to be very happy. So enjoy the work that you have. And be sure that you're balancing that in whatever way works for you. With the family and other commitments that you have. And I tell young folks all the time, be at peace with the decisions that you make. You don't want to go through life with a lot of regrets or being unhappy. I've counseled people out of my company if they're unhappy. I said, life's too short. If you're not getting what you think you need, really, and some have and have done well, some have gone and come back. So that happens. But be at peace with those decisions that you make, and be sure you strike the balance that you and your family or others that are involved in your life are going to get to an outcome that's going to work for you in total, not just professionally.
Okay, so it's 5:50 witching hour. I have a class to teach. Thank you, John. That's been
Thank you all very much.
amazing.
Appreciate it.